Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. I need you to think about the last thing you bought online. Maybe a new TV, some tools, or even those sneakers you've been eyeing. What if I told you that purchase and every other import is sitting inside a $1.2 trillion legal battle that is right now, today, playing out in the most secretive room in Washington, D.C.? I'm talking about the Supreme Court. The highest court in the land is about to decide if they will force an end to all of President Trump's most controversial tariffs. This legal challenge, formerly known as Trump v. Vos selections, centers on the administration's sweeping use of a 1977 statute, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA, to impose duties globally, claiming the U.S. trade deficit constitutes a national emergency, even though the nation has run a trade deficit nearly every year since 1975. Lower courts have already ruled that the president exceeded his authority, arguing that IEEPA, which grants the power to regulate imports during a crisis, does not explicitly grant the authority to levy tariffs, which is a taxation power reserved by the Constitution for Congress. This is not a political debate, folks. This is a constitutional cage match that pits the White House against the power of Congress. And it will redefine not only who sets U.S. trade policy, but how much you pay for everything, as the potential consequences include the refunding of over $100 billion in duties already paid by U.S. importers. We are going deep into the Supreme Court versus Trump, the $1.2 trillion trade battle. Stick with me, because what the justices decide here will directly hit your pocketbook and change global commerce forever. To understand the stakes in this Supreme Court battle, we must isolate the central constitutional problem, the power of the purse. The U.S. Constitution unequivocally grants Congress the authority to levy taxes and impose tariffs. Yet, President Trump, in his implementation of sweeping trade duties, bypassed specific trade laws and relied instead on a 1977 statute known as the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA. This law was originally designed to be a narrowly tailored tool for presidents to impose sanctions on hostile foreign actors, such as freezing assets or blocking transactions, in response to genuine crises like the Iran hostage crisis, not for setting long-term comprehensive trade policy. The administration justified its unprecedented use by declaring the nation's long-standing trade deficit, which has existed almost continuously since 1975, an unusual and extraordinary threat to national security. This use of IEEPA allowed the imposition of reciprocal tariffs generating billions in revenue, but lower federal courts have consistently ruled against this interpretation. They found the core legal question hinges on whether the word regulate in IEEPA's text is broad enough to include the power to tax or impose tariffs. Given the Constitution's clear delegation of taxing power to the legislature, the lower courts have determined that without explicit congressional authorization of the tariff power within IEEPA, the president overstepped his statutory authority. Now, the 9 justices face the difficult task of determining the ultimate boundary of presidential power and the separation of powers in U.S. trade policy. This particular challenge, formally consolidated under the name Trump v. Vos selections, has proven to be far from straightforward, prompting the Supreme Court to take the rare and telling step of dedicating a whole 3 hours to oral arguments, double the usual time, highlighting the gravity and constitutional complexity of the case. The justices' clear split during these arguments reveals their deep anxieties about the separation of powers. Attorneys supporting the administration's tariffs argued forcefully that these duties are a necessary foreign policy tool, essential for the president to retain flexibility and respond swiftly to what they deem a global economic threat. They cautioned that striking down the use of the International Emergency Economic Powers Act would effectively tie the hands of the commander-in-chief in a time of intense global economic competition. However, the challengers, representing a coalition of importers and constitutional scholars, countered this by pressing the limits of statutory interpretation. During questioning, Justice Sotomayor pointedly challenged the government's stance, asking why, if Congress intended to grant the president the power to impose taxes, the IEEPA law failed to use the explicit term tariff. Significantly, Justice Barrett, a conservative appointee, echoed this skepticism, demanding a single historical precedent where the power to regulate in U.S. law has ever been interpreted to mean the power to impose a tariff, thereby signaling a lack of faith in the administration's broad reading of the statute. This brings us to a crucial point for engagement. Who do you believe should hold the power to impose these massive economy-altering taxes? The president, who can act decisively, or Congress, whose constitutional mandate, though slower, is designed to represent the public will? Let me know your stance in the comments below. President or Congress? This section addresses a crucial point: why these esoteric legal definitions, like the difference between regulate and taxation under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, genuinely carry staggering stakes for every consumer. The direct consequence of the Supreme Court striking down these tariffs and ruling that the president overstepped his statutory authority would be an immediate and significant disruption to the U.S. economy. The tariffs, which have generated over $100 billion in duties, would instantly be rendered illegal. This foundational change opens the door to massive class action lawsuits and could potentially force the federal government to refund an estimated $90 billion already collected to the importers who paid the duties. The pivotal question for the consumer is whether that substantial refund will ultimately trickle down to lower prices on store shelves. Beyond the immediate financial impact, a ruling against the executive branch would fundamentally eliminate a swift and powerful tool from the president's trade arsenal, compelling future administrations, regardless of party affiliation, to seek often slow and politically gridlocked congressional approval before imposing large-scale trade taxes, thereby changing America's speed in reacting to trade disputes. But the true twist lies in the policy intent. The administration has explicitly signaled that even if they lose on the IEEPA question, they are prepared to pivot immediately to alternate statutory authorities such as Section 232 or Section 122 to reimpose similar tariffs, underscoring that this current battle is truly focused on the legal source of authority, not necessarily an end to the underlying trade policy itself. This Supreme Court ruling is emphatically not just about a $1.2 trillion trade war. It has become a profound case about the fundamental balance of power explicitly defined within the U.S. Constitution. The ultimate question the justices face is whether the president can retain the sweeping ability to use broadly interpreted emergency powers under the IEEPA to levy massive economy-altering taxes, or whether the court will reset the constitutional balance by forcing trade authority and the power to impose duties firmly back to Congress. 1. The urgency of this issue is reflected in the expedited manner in which the court took the case, with strong expectations that a decision will be released sooner rather than later, potentially before the end of the year, although the timeline could stretch into the following spring. Until that final decision is handed down, the actual trade rules that govern the pricing of nearly every imported product you buy hang in the balance. I will be tracking every word of the forthcoming opinions, dissecting the statutory and constitutional implications the moment they are released. Therefore, to ensure you do not miss the final market-moving verdict and the immediate analysis of its fallout, make sure you smash that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you receive the breaking update the minute the Supreme Court decides. And let me know your final, educated prediction in the comments below. Who ultimately wins this historic showdown? The Supreme Court or Trump? We'll see you next time. To catch every major news story like this one, subscribe and turn on the bell, and let me know your thoughts in the comments.